welcome everyone to Prostone Center Online. And this is the Emergent Freedom, which is the Torah of Spring, about the Pesach and freedom and renewal. And it's part of the rest of the Prostone at Pesach at Prostone offerings, which are also found on the website, and it's also part of Prostone Center Online, the rest of the sessions. So if you go to the website and the link that's on the bottom of this video, whoever's watching this on Facebook, you can find the rest of the sessions there as well. Or you go prostonecenter.org/Torah. So what we're consciously trying to do is to bring ancestral teachings and express the deep nature connection between them. And with the Jewish tradition, that is quite easy because all of the celebrations are modeled after the natural cycle of the year. So this class is particularly about Pesach, and it is part of, and I'm going to go to, for some of things, this might be like very elementary, but I want to just cover, for those of us who are not used to that material, I just want to cover it. So there's 3 pilgrimage festivals, which is Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And the festival that this class is about, and at this exact time of the year, is Pesach. And Pesach is the full moon of the first moon of the spring. So right now we're in the spring. The Jewish year starts in the spring. So this is the Jewish New Year. And it's not clear, just like in life, it's not clear when the Jewish New Year actually starts. Does it start in the first of the month, which is the beginning of the moon? Or it's the fullness of the month? Hello, good to see you all. So in the fullness of the month, which would be Pesach, which is the holiday that's coming up next, next moon that comes up the next night, that will be the fullness of the month, or whether the Jewish New Year starts on the 1st of Nisan, which is the new moon. But right now we're reaching its fullness. So each month in the agricultural cycle and in the natural cycle and in the Jewish calendar, because the Jewish calendar is counting the dance between the moon and the sun. So each month has its character that it brings to the year. It's that change element that it's bringing to the year. And so the first moon of the beginning of the Jewish year is this moon, and that's Pesach. The last moon of the agricultural cycle is the 7th month, which is in Tishrei. So traditionally, a lot of times people describe the new year as Rosh Hashanah, which is talking about the new moon of the 7th month, which is the beginning of the raining cycle. We just actually left the dark part of the year, the rain cycle, the rain part of the year, and moved into the dry part of the year with this coming month. And these 7 months are actually the seven months of emergence. So if we a lot of times wonder, what is the connection between the 7th, why in Jewish lineage and in teachings, the 7th is so essential and so important. Where do you see that in nature? Well, there's many things. First of all, there's 7 moving objects in the sky. There's 7 movers that move around. The stars are like moving like this, and there's 7 movers, and there's a lot of 7s. But the most basic, in the sense of that you're moving through it in life, you're experiencing that, aside from the 7 movers, is that there's 7 moons that are in the growth. So dry part of the year, which is where all the agriculture and everything is coming into fruition and coming into existence and being born, and the work part of the year, because the work part of the year is connected to the activity, the active part of the year. That's from this month of spring all the way into the fall, and includes the beginning of the rainy cycle. And here we have a model of Shabbat, so 6 months, just like 6 days, and then you have Shabbat, which is the stopping activity. So in the agricultural year, you have 6 moons that are doing active, everything, the life is in this active state. And then you have the next moon, which is all of a sudden deactive, where things are falling apart and things are going back into decay. This is the first month of the active part of the year. But what we say is that Shabbat, and Shabbat is the 7th, but the 7th includes all 6, right? We always say that in Shabbat includes all 6 days. So if this first 6 days are described as masculine, the 7th one is feminine, and she contains all 6 of those masculine energies. But if you look at the year, she actually does. So if you look at that womb of the rainy cycle, of the rainy part of the year, of the dark part of the year, of the winter part of the year, it contains 6 moons itself. So in the collapse part of the year, the part of the year that's return, it also contains 6. So that is mirroring Shabbat having this, like, all 6 days. So the 6 days are in Shabbat. In the stopping of doing something, it contains everything that was done. In the silence, or in the quiet, you have everything that could be said. So in the potential, you have all the actualities. So that's mirrored in the yearly cycle, and we're at this very first moon, Shavuot, which is the second Jewish pilgrimage festival. There's dogs barking, and I like that. So if you hear it, I'm just gonna acknowledge them and how wild they are. Actually, those aren't dogs, they're coyotes, or jackals. Shavuot is the second pilgrimage festival, and that's at the height of the summer. So if Pesach is spring, height of the summer is Shavuot, and fall is Sukkot. That's the third Jewish pilgrimage festival. Sukkot is the beginning of the rainy cycle. That goes into those 6 months. And if anyone has questions, they could put them into the chat, or just say that you have a question and you could say it. So Shavuot is the dividing line. From Pesach this spring until Shavuot, which is in 3 months, you have the grain harvest. After Sukkot, you have the tree harvest. So you move from grain thinking for these first 3 months of the year, and then you go into tree thinking, which is after Shavuot. There's 2 main elements to Shavuot, and we're talking about Pesach, but I just want to say, which is you bring the loaves of bread, which is the end of the grain harvest, and you bring the first fruits of the trees. So it splits. And the first fruits of the trees go until Sukkot, when you get the last of the trees, aside from the olives. So this Pesach is the beginning of the barley harvest. And then we count 7 weeks. Again, it's these 7s. 7 weeks of 7 days each. And then we hit Shavuot. And during those 7 weeks of 7 days, that's the beginning of the barley harvest. And then the finality of that is the end of the wheat harvest. So barley comes in first, wheat comes in later, but the entirety of the grain cycle, which is the thing that makes up bread, is what's being celebrated and started off in Pesach. Okay, so these 3 holidays in the deeper teachings are also linked up with Hachna'ah, Havdalah, and Hamtakah. Hachna'ah is surrender. Havdalah is difference or differentiation, separation. And Hamtakah is sweetening. So every growth, and this is in Kabbalah and inside of Torah, and it's all these threes over and over and over again, is understanding the cycle of growth, the way things grow. They start off in this surrendered state, then they move to where they differentiate themselves and they gain definition, and then it falls apart and goes back into unity. That's just like the entirety of the agricultural cycle. Everything emerges, it gets definition, and then it goes back into unity. And it keeps happening over and over again. So we hear that as a linguistic communication, as a teaching, that in nature, which is the creation, which is the voice of the creator, the words of the creator, the source of creation, we see, and we can hear that everything goes through these stages. So, thank you. So the Omer is a bundle, and the Omer is actually counting off the grain. And so we're emerging out of the rainy season, going into the dry season. And at this exact moment, when we needed rain was when the seeds were in the ground and they were in potential. They needed watering and they needed that moistness. But now that they're coming to their fruition and they're coming out of their shell, they no longer need the wetness, and the wetness will make them mold, decay, and fall apart, because moisture draws something back to its source, back to decay. So you don't want it to rain right now. And every single day is very, very important, starting with Pesach, going to Shavuot, is that it does not rain. If it rains, you ruin your harvest. Like when I was, if you're having a heyday, when someone says it's back in their heyday, it's you're hoping for a dry, heyday is like the thing that you're hoping for dry. If you get a wet heyday, then all your hay is gone. So that same thing that happens with hay is the same thing that happens when you're trying to get the grains. And so literally what happens from Pesach until Shavuot is you're counting the days. That's the Omer. And we'll talk about that actually in another class about the Omer, about what that means to count the days. I have a whole, one second. I have a snoring dog. Hold on. So I hope that that makes sense. So the Pesach is the beginning of the grain harvest, and it's moving forward. And in another session, we'll go and we'll talk about the whole thing of the Omer and the counting the grain. But right now, we're going to sort of laser focus on the very beginning of that. Grain, in its symbol and what it means, is the rational human mind, the mind that knows. And you go into tree knowledge. So after Shavuot, when you get to the top of the mountain, then you're moving into tree knowledge. And tree knowledge, which is Eitz Chaim, Torah, all the knowledge of trees, is the knowledge that goes over generations, not just about you, but vast generational cycles. The grain is an annual and not a perennial, and the knowledge that an annual teaches you is just of your life. It's like the knowledge of it's the rational mind, like I'm acting rational means acting with self-interest in what makes sense. So that trees are like, oh, I'm planting trees for somebody that I'll never meet. Just because life is vast and much longer, and there's cycles of lives going through, and I'm contributing to this whole vast thing. That's like tree knowledge. This grain knowledge is what is my life? What is rational in my life? So Pesach is the fullness of this act. So if spring is in the beginning is the part of Hachna'ah, is the part of the surrender to what just simply is, the smallness, then when the moon comes to her fullness, it's the full expression of that idea. So what comes in a new moon is like, oh, we're just beginning to see spring. Now in this full moon, when she's totally out, she's contributing. We see her in this fullness, and that's like the character of it. And then that full moon gets celebrated. Particularly, the elements of the celebration have to do with the character of that moon. So Pesach is about, which should be clear, which is about beginnings, right? It's a new year. It's Aviv. It's called the Chodesh Aviv in Torah. It's called Aviv, which is the spring. And it has all the characteristics of that spring. So it's youth and hello, Matt. It's joyful. It's weak. It has to go through the pain of growth. To be able to grow out of something old is a tremendous amount of pain. Like if you see a chrysalis on top of a bug emerging out of a chrysalis, there's so much pain of just etching out of its shell. And the same thing is happening in the grains. So grain, what's happening in this part of the harvest is not that the grain is growing. The grain is dried. It's going to come to its definition, going to come to its fruition. But that thing of breaking out of its cast, breaking out of its shell, and inching out is mirrored in the grain, the little seed breaking out of a shell, in the year, the new year emerging out of the old year, out of the womb of the old year, which is the dark part of the year where it was in potential. And it's mirrored by the birth of all the lambs that are being born at this time. So you have the lambs and the goats and even people that are all that we used to be on the same cycle as well, which is to be the birth of new animals is happening right now too. So all of this emergence is happening. That's why I was calling it emergent freedom, because freedom comes from youth. Right? Youth are free. They're not held back by their past, and they emerge with those characteristics. It's weak, it's small, but it's young and it's joyful, and there's pain, and it's fresh and it's undefined, and it has all that characteristic. So this moon, which is this first moon of spring, this is what she's like, and the celebration has everything to do with that. And of course, because it's new, it's flawed, because it lacks experience and lacks definition. So it's like a little baby. And that's actually the name of Pesach. So the name Pesach means to skip. It means skipping, like like a little joyful skipping. And the goat or a lamb is what it's called a Pesach lamb, meaning a skipping lamb, which is a young little lamb just leaping around. It doesn't even know what it is. It's just enjoying what it is. It's just young. So that's the entirety of the holiday is summed up. In fact, old traditional Haggadahs, which is the book that you would have when you tell the story of Pesach, which is the number one ritual in Pesach, when you tell that story, the tradition was always to print a little goat on the cover. It needs to have a goat on the front cover, and that would be a definition of Haggadah. You would see a little goat, and you would know, oh, this is a Haggadah, which is the story of Pesach. And then at the end, the last song is about the little goat again. So there's three major principles, three major elements of the Pesach night. And these are the things that where in the Seder it says, whoever doesn't say these three things, Pesach, Matzah, and Maror, doesn't do Pesach. So up there's Matt, and he's showing a little skipping lamb. So these three elements, the Pesach, the Matzah, and the Maror. And Pesach is the skipping lamb. Matzah is the flat bread, and matzah is a bread that is made without any other ingredients. It's just flour and water on a fire, and that's it. So there's no other ingredients at all, and it's the most simple sustenance and the most simple grain that can be produced, and it's flat, i.e. it's not puffed up. And maror is an edible herb, any type. It's bitter, and it's the young greens that come up right at this time of the year. And so like dandelion greens or any of this stuff, horseradish or any of these greens, it's the greens that you eat. It's like you can find them growing all over the ground at this time. And that's the third element. So you have the Pesach, the matzah, and the maror. That's the symbols. And then it's the telling of the story of leaving Egypt. These are very simple. Like this is like the core of this thing, but these are the looking at the essential aspect of it is where the most of the oil is. So the story of leaving Egypt, which is the mitzvah, you have to, during tomorrow night, you tell the story of leaving Egypt. And it says, Bechol dor v'dor, in every generation, Chayav Adam liras es atzmo, ki'iluhu yatzim mitzrayim, that in every generation, a person is required to see themselves as if they are leaving Egypt. And so that gives us an idea that it's not saying just a story of old, but they have to tell their own leaving Egypt story every year. So the idea that redemption comes through storytelling is also an amazing idea. Redemption comes from this, redemption comes from that. Now, redemption comes from telling a story. That's how you redeem yourself, is by telling a story. That's the second element. So the first are these three symbols that are being literally embodied. So you eat, it's part of the requirement, you eat the Pesach, you eat the matzah, you eat the maror, and they become part of you. Right? So in the eating of it, it becomes part of you. So the characteristics of these three things, which are all youthful, weak, young, skipping, they're all those, right? Like the simplest bread, the greens that are just sprouting up right now, and the lamb are all on that same, they all share that same thread. They're all embodying this, what is alive right now. And then telling the story. And then the last element is removing chametz. And chametz is leaven. Leaven means it's like sourdough. So it's fermented grains. So there's a prohibition of having any leavened grains around. So not only do you not eat them, and you eat the young bread, which is the simple bread that doesn't get puffy and doesn't get risen up. You also have, there's also and it's literally at Har Sinai, this gets transmitted, the importance of not eating chametz, not just that you eat matzah, but you don't eat chametz, which is risen bread. So the symbol of risen bread is like old culture, right? Quite literally in English, it also works out just like it does in Hebrew, that chametz is the old culture. It's like the sourdough from last year. It's from inherited cultural things. And that's in the culture, i.e. it's adding to your mind, and it's giving you the extra structure that builds up the bread to be much more than the grain actually is. And actually nutritionally it adds to it as well. But it's of the old. And since this month is shedding that, it's the whole idea of leaving the old and emerging out of it, then it's the removal of chametz, the removal of any fermentedness to your grains, and only to have them new and fresh. So those three elements, which the telling of the story, these three elements that are eaten, and then the removal of chametz, are what is the way this moon is celebrated. So the first one we talked about, which is the Pesach lamb, which is the skipping one, you can actually try it, and it's never failed me ever, which is that try to skip and be unhappy. Just try it. Like you're in a bad mood and you're unhappy, and just get up and start skipping around and see if you're able, even for 1 second, to keep that bad mood. It's almost impossible. I mean, I've never, it comes, you begrudgingly do it, it goes away, and then you happily get your frustration and sadness back once you stop. But in the act of skipping, it's literally impossible. Like it just doesn't happen. You either can't skip, like you literally can't skip, or if you can get the skip in the skip, you can't do that. So the skipping itself is related also to Pesach, like in the word, when it gets translated into English, it gets translated as passing over. Because the idea is that the creator was literally skipping around like a little goat on top of the houses, and passed over our house for the plague. So that's where the word of skipping, of like passing over, like when you're skipping a leg, right? You're like da-dun, da-da-dun, da-da-dun, like skipping a step. The creator did that, and then it gets changed in English to Passover because it's passing over a house. So that is describing the time in Egypt when the plague was all around in the air. And the Pesach lamb, when everyone's boarded up into their houses, the blood of the lamb gets put on the doorposts to say, in sort of it could be seen as macabre, but just look at the starkness of it. The blood is already on the house, right? So what if the world could be created in any way, and it could be anything, and this is what it is, what is the good of death? What is the aspect of death that is his goodness? So in the natural cycle, in the year, you have that. So you have the active and flourishing part of the year, and then you have the year where everything's going into decay. And you see so much benefits during that time when you're watching the decaying part of the year. You're watching all this tremendous benefits of decay. And you see how decay and growth are actually, they're twins. So you don't have growth if you didn't have decay, and you don't have decay if you didn't have growth. And they're actually, it's a single thing. And you're able to see it as a cycle. The goodness that comes from cessation, like Shabbat, of not acting, of stopping, the goodness that comes from that is all the tremendous renewal that comes from stopping. So when you stop and you go into a state of decay, or when you go into a state of fall, the new thing that will emerge from that fall is much greater than when you stepped into it. However, and so the old gets cleared out and new things emerge. However, there's in Jewish tradition, there's an idea that in order to avoid it, I can just go through a state of death of my own. I can say, okay, I'm done with the past, so I don't have to die. I'm like a baby right now. So if the old version of myself was no longer needed, okay, I'm dumping that, and now I'm like a baby, like everything else, and I can move forward. And so in that sort of very stark and shocking image of blood on the doorpost, it's saying, all right, I've already been hit. I have no expectations. I'm like a little baby, and so you don't have to take me out. That's like of what use? I'm ready to move. I'm ready to move on like a little baby. You actually, I don't want to go too much into that, but there's actually two Mashiachs that are described, Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David, and describes Mashiach ben Yosef as the first Mashiach, Mashiach ben David as the second. Mashiach ben Yosef needs to die, but in Jewish tradition, if Mashiach ben Yosef is able to die unto himself, i.e., be humble, lose every definition of what he thought he was, and be able to move into a new version of himself, then Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David can be the same person. And in that archetype, that is true for us too. So if I'm able to let go of a previous self and emerge into something new, then I don't have to go through the death. I can just move with like a with a smooth transition. There's also, I'm going to get derailed since this is, I'm going to keep it not derailed. But anyways, for another time. So chametz is, the purity of it is this accumulated culture, right? Was beneficial, but is now holding you back. So in the same sense of the year, last year was beneficial. It had its time, but now for a new year to emerge, it needs to come out. It needs to be born. So it needs to shed the restraints and the restrictions of the previous year. So that the idea of, at that exact moment, of avoiding chametz, meaning avoiding leaven, is the idea of being able to remove yourself from accumulated culture. So, like when we and on a sort of very stark example, is that a culture dies if it's not able to renew itself, right? So one of the near constant focus of the Jewish tradition is to every year renew itself so that it doesn't die culturally. And that's how you have, it's like a paradox. So if you want to have a tradition that goes on through millennia, then the culture will constantly have to die unto itself, renew itself, so that it can live in a new state and be authentic to its past, but not be held back by the cultural accumulation. That's on like some vast millennial structure. But in a personal thing, for us to have what the Torah calls long life, many days, it means that I also need to go through that stage. I also need to be able to sort of go through a renewal of self so that I can have many days, as opposed to just having one day, which is like one long drawn out day where I'm just trying to be the exact, like a carbon copy of what I was yesterday. So in Shir Shirim, which we talked about in the other, I probably will quote it every single time, which is the Song of Songs. It says, "The voice of my beloved is approaching. It skips over the mountains and it leaps over the hills." So that is Pesach, it's skipping, where the lover is leaping around. That is the same sort of hovering that the Creator does when the breath of God is hovering over the waters. Everything is cold, dark, and wet, and all of a sudden you have the Shekhinah, the breath, sort of hovering over the waters. That same action of skipping, hovering, it's like the flittering, like it's emerging. Things are emerging. And that is like the birth of Pesach, and you have that again in the splitting of the sea. And when we're leaving Egypt and we're cutting through the sea, you have that exact same moment being birthed here. So someone says, isn't this happening on some level with this plague today? So at this exact moment, there's a plague in the air. and everyone's in their houses, and everyone's going through a cultural renewal, which is that people will now look at what was last year, what was a previous culture that they lived in, and because of the breakdown and because of the decay of this culture, they'll say, all right, what do I have to let go of? What is essential? What is not? Where were some of these old systems that were just not working? And they may have served somebody, and they may have even served me last year, but they're not helping, and they're actually holding the new birth back. And that will be, in this moon, will be completely realized. There will be like, so like Tali said, it's the moment of now, this moment, especially when we're here together, is definitely where the Pesach energy is like some sort of wild Pesach of Pesach. It's actually a reenactment this year, literally, of the first Pesach. In fact, the first Pesach was exactly that you needed to stay inside your house. That was the instruction. Stay inside your house so that you don't die. It's mind-boggling. But also, the leaving Egypt aspect is also very true right now. The look at what these old systems and old cultural restraints, and look at what needs to emerge and be able to embrace that. Part of that embracing it is embracing pain. I don't want to always just talk about pain, but part of it is, so you have the Pesach, the matzah, and the moror. The moror is the bitterness of it, because when you have all that accumulation, it becomes bitter to you. And also, the youth, to be able to grow, is to be able to embrace the pain of growing. All growth has pain. It has it. And the more you're going to grow, the more the more of that, of being able to face and if you shy away from it, then you won't. It doesn't have to go. But that doesn't have to be where it's that it's not good, right? So it can still be seen as good, but that's what's required. It's like a part of it. It's like little kids. They're like the little kids, both little goat and little goats are kids, and little human kids. They don't have the same relation to pain because they're constantly trying to grow, and they have this desire to do the things that they want to learn and get to the places that they want to get to, and learn these things. And they know they just have to keep like falling down and boom, and and they go, ow, but they just keep doing it and doing it and doing it, and they're not so like, I can't do this anymore, because they need to they're driven to get to their definition. They want to get to the top of the mountain, so they're going to have to do it, and they just keep doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it. And it's not like so in each year we we embrace and embody that youthfulness, and this has nothing to do with what age we are. So it needs the entirety of the community. So it's not talking about, oh, only young people can be this way, but if you're old, you can't be that way. You can, each one of us can be that way, up until it says about Moshe Rabbeinu that he didn't reach his completion till his last day on earth, meaning he was like it's like, I don't know, let's see what today is, each day like a baby. So the second aspect, which is the telling of the story, which is something that's really salient in Pesach. And when you're doing the Seder, and is the whole thing of this, that the most important thing is to tell the story. And the leaving of Egypt is the telling of the story. So Mitzrayim, the Hebrew word for Mitzrayim, Egypt, it means Metzar, is actually the word for constraint. It means like a narrow neck. Now, ecologically, or the geology of Mitzrayim, the ecology of it is a narrow neck. It's like the narrow neck of Africa, and that's where the Nile is. And the entire culture is on this I was in Egypt, and it's actually really amazing because it's a straight line. So like the thinking of Egypt is this: when you're there, you're just basically traveling up and down a straight line because it's a desert around, and it actually literally is like a neck. So it's like all culture and growth is going along the Nile like this, and then it opens up like that, and it goes. That's where the Mediterranean is, and I guess the delta. But its thinking is it's the thing that's narrow and that it's constraining. It's like the womb of the Jewish people was Egypt, and its narrowness is like the birth canal opening up, and then you go through the sea, and that's like breaking water, and then you're born. But the biggest constraint is the inability to fully express yourself, and that is the source of that. Like the deeper thing is the ability to define oneself. So if I'm limited by my expression, even if I get rid of all of the physical bars that are holding me back, or the constraints that are stopping me from expressing myself, if I can't define myself, if I can't define myself for myself, then I'm in a complete prison. Because even if nothing's in my way, if I can't define myself on my own, then I'm imprisoned by the whatever definition of myself was I'm holding on to. So for a person, it means to be in prison in the deepest sense, meaning not to being able to tell your own story. So for the Jewish people, if you're a slave, then the Egyptians are writing your story, right? They're telling you who you are, and they're telling you the story of your life, right? And they're telling you who you are as a people. And if you're not able to write your own story, then you're not even able to be a people, because a people are held together by their story. So if someone else tells you what your story is and defines you as a people, and you're listening to some some other storyteller from telling you what you are, then you're not a nation anymore. You're not a people, or you're not a tribe, or you're not a family. And if someone else is telling your story and you lack that ability, then you're also being enslaved in the deepest sense of slavery. So because we live in the stories of the lives that we live in the stories of the lives that we tell about the life that we tell, the story about ourselves. We live in that story. And so if we're not able to do that, then and that's why the Seder night is considered in Jewish education to be the core of Jewish education. So all of Jewish education, and actually is all, and the way of which teaching is sort of modeled, all has to do with this Seder night. It's this telling from the elders to the children, what this story. Here's our story. And our story is that we're not slaves. So that being able to say, right, it's when you say, here's your story. The story is you're not a slave. Now you're not a slave, right? So now even if someone goes and grabs you, they wrap you up and they put you in chains and they drag you somewhere, that's what they're doing. But I know that my whole story is that I'm not a slave. I'm not a slave to anyone, and anything that anyone does to me, I'm not enslaved by you, right? And I tell my own story. So even if you put me in chains, even if you kill me, I'm going to tell my own story about myself. The minute you own my story and you tell me what my story is, so then it's all lost. And that's why the extreme focus on education in Jewish tradition and in the Jewish lineage. Why so much teaching? Why keep saying stories over and over and over and over and over and over and over again? Why do you have to have your own story about everything? It's because if you lose that, then it's all sort of it's like the opposite of coming out of Egypt, which is why over and over again in the Torah, the creator is always saying, I'm the creator of the world. I took you out of Egypt. It just keeps saying that over and over, over and over. I took you out of Egypt. You're not in Egypt. And so once you define yourself like that, then you're never a slave. And that's not true for just the Jewish people. The creator of the world, if there's a source to all of this, nobody's enslaved, right? It's a story for everyone, not just for the Jewish people, obviously. So part of that, being imprisoned by a story, is being imprisoned by your own story. Even the greatest imprisonment is like even if no one is forcing their story on you, but you're still holding on to that story, right? In other words, they walked away, but you're still. They said something about you, and they defined you one way, and they're gone. They're out of the picture, and you're still going on with that story. And that is like a double darkness, like a double slavery. It's like you left Egypt, but it's still in you. Redemption, meaning to redeem something with Mashiach, redemption, a messianic thing, is to be able to retell your story, to go back into your life and retroactively retell your story, which you could actually, and this happens in historian mode, where actually some historical models are to go back and retell the Jewish story according to like a historical thing. But when you do, from a Jewish perspective, if you do that, you're actually now ruining it ruins our story. Because then all of a sudden I'm telling my story through the eyes of a historian. And now all of a sudden I'm not telling my own story. And now it's actually like retroactively enslaved, right? But if I'm able to retell my story every year, and I define my story by this day, on this day I retell my story, I'll retell my story exactly the way I need to this year. And no one else will own me. And this is the way I'll tell my story. This is what it means to leave Egypt for me, and I'm the owner of all of that, and no one gets to tell me what it means. That act that you do at that day and that you model for your children is like an extremely liberating act. One of the most interesting things is that the word Psachyah, which is related to Pesach, it's the same thing, to skip. It also means to limp, right? And so there you have, skipping or limping, right? So someone says, if I tell my story is that I have a certain crutch in life, and I have a negative aspect to myself, i.e. I have a limp, right? I'm just not able to go through life in this full way. And this is a bad part of me, and I'm working towards fixing it, right? I'm trying to improve this bad quality of mine, right? So that's like work. But redemption, i.e. freedom, is when you turn Psachyah, which is like that, I have a limp. You say, no, I don't have a limp, I skip, right? I'm retelling my story, right? Like, I don't know, I'm such a goofball. I always fall for all these things. I'm just too generous with people. I've got to get harder. I got to stop doing this. It's always the same story. I end up being too nice to somebody, and then look what happened. You know. So at a certain point, you get burned enough that you're like, yeah, I have to stop this. But then the redemption of it is like, who said that was so bad? Who said it was so bad that I got burned a couple? You know, like who says that that's so bad? Maybe that's a good thing of me, right? The same thing like. I just sit around, I'm so lazy. I should be doing more. There's all these other amazing, very active people. Who says that sitting around and thinking about things is so bad, right? Once you can see that it's not your limp, but it's your skip, it's the joyful, simple essence of you, and there's no reason to define it in that horrible story about how it's a bad aspect of you, then all of a sudden you're like retroactively redeemed. Not only does that part of you all of a sudden now it's the greatest thing, but then you go back in your story and you say, oh, look at all these good things, right? All of those moments in my life where I felt like, wow, look, see, I did that, and really I'm such a da. Then you can say, look at that, I did that again, and I did that again, and that's really me, and I don't have to be anything different than me. It was good, right? So that's it in Yeshayahu. It says that at that time, and this is talking about the fullness of days in the time of Mashiach, that the lame man will skip like a mountain goat, right? So the Psachyah, the one who limps, will skip. So that verse is sharing this exact Torah, which is that in the time of Mashiach, the one who's limping will skip. What does that mean? Like, oh, he's limping, and all of a sudden he's skipping around, so he doesn't have to. So he's healed of his limp. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking is that all of a sudden we realize, no, the one who's limping is skipping. We'll see the goodness of each aspect of ourselves, and that story won't no longer be told, right? It won't be a flaw, but it will be a retelling of that story. So in the if anyone wants to share, they can share in the chat or share. In that transformation goes back to the Hachna, Havdalah, and the Hamtakah, the Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, which is the Hachna is the surrender. So that is shedding any previous idea of what you imagine things were, shedding any previous story of yourself, letting go of all of that chametz, all of that accumulated cultural or accumulated self-cultural, like the way you built the previous version of yourself. And hachna'ah is surrender. Surrender to just what actually is. The simplest bread, the youngest little goat, the little herbs that grow on the side of the road. Those things, what's that in you? What were you when you were the simplest goat? What were you before you got puffed up and had a version of you? But what is the actual you? And what are you if you were just like the little thing that grew on the side of the road? So that's like the hachna. The Havdalah is like, okay, let me take that essence again of what am I in my essence, and now let me puff that up. Let me grow from there. And that's Shavuot. Shavuot is where you bring the loaves of bread. They're puffed up, they're chametz. And then it's a mitzvah, and it's a great joy to bring the bread, to bring chametz, to bring a puffed up version of yourself after. But for this year to emerge, at this exact moment, there's no puff. You have to let go of everything. What am I in my essence? And I'll start the new year off with that. And then I can grow from there. But I can't have the previous growth. And then Sukkot, which is the end of this, which is, okay, I made that definition of myself, but now I'm gonna have to let go of it. I have to realize I'm not just that, and I have to embrace the unity with everything else. So it's obvious that at that exact moment of being born is a moment of great pain, right? So the month in between the full moon of Adar and the full moon of Nisan, which is the last full moon of the rainy cycle, and the first full moon, which is this full moon of birth, that is the most painful part of the year. It's the part of the year where all this, the coming out of the womb is like the essence of pain. But it's also at that exact same time the essence of joy and the essence of freedom. And they need each other. So it's like when you see buds growing on trees, all of the effort that the bud takes to break out of the hard part of the branch, right? You see it like pushes and then it cracks that old bark, and then it comes out and it's fresh, and then it opens up. The same thing with the shell in grain, actually. It's a really interesting part of the Gemara, of the Talmud, where there's a Roman princess, and she's looking to convert because she wants to become Jewish. So she comes to the rabbis and she has all these questions. She says, I love this. Oh, I love this. I love this. What's this crazy resurrection thing that you keep talking? You keep talking about dead bodies and come back to life. Like, I just can't, like, what are you talking about? So he says to her, it's like wheat, right? They die and they go into the earth and then they come back. Like, it's the most obvious, like the dead body goes in, so it's gonna come back. You don't have to hold on to the shell. And it's like, that's the source. And then she's like, oh, so when she hears it, she's like, oh, I get it. So there's a lot of depth to that, exactly what that means and what is his metaphor that he's trying to say. But in the most simple part is that our lives we live through many lives. So if we go into the ground and then we come back, we go into the ground and we come back, that's like wheat, right? Because it's not like wheat is the exact same wheat plant comes back, but the kernel of that wheat plant goes into the ground and then it comes back. So the essence of you goes in and then comes back and goes in and then comes back and goes in and then comes back. So that's what he's trying to share with her. But anyways, that is obviously a painful process. So, and right now all the lambs are being born. So all of that is like this 30 days of the moment of birth. And we're holding on to a childlike moment in Pesach. So are there any thoughts? There's a transition right here. But, so one of the ways that this is, one of the ways in Kabbalah that this is modeled is the idea of everything being recreated in every moment. So not only is there the Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, the Hachna, Havdalah, and Hamtaka over the year, there's that same process that goes on during the week. And there's the same process that happens during the month. So in the process of the month, the new moon is the Hachna, the full moon is the Havdalah, and the waning moon is the unity. So Pesach is the new moon, Shavuot is the full moon, and Sukkot is the waned moon. But that same thing is happening during the week. But also those three elements, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, Hachna, Havdalah, and Hamtaka, those are happening in every moment. Because for one beautiful thing about Jewish tradition is it doesn't actually recognize time, and had a massive ignoring of time. When the Greeks introduced the idea to Jewish people, we interacted with them for about hundreds and hundreds of years, of which we never wanted to refer to time as an actual thing. Even though we adopted many, many Greek ideas, we refused to adopt that idea and just kept talking about it as if there was no chronos whatsoever and there's no time, as like time will tell, time heals, time doesn't do anything. The only thing for Jewish is change. And even the name for the time, Shana, year, means change, meaning that things are changing. One of the concepts is that how change happens moment to moment is that the entire world is destroyed and then the information from the previous moment is brought in like a line into the vacuum of the empty space of where the world used to exist. And that information is used to recreate the world again. And that's what makes these minute changes. And that's what people call time. which is the world constantly created and recreated over and over and over and over again. And that concept has in it the most sort of redemptive and free look on life, which is that it's complete. Like, yes, it looks like we're beholden to the past, but actually this exact moment is an absolute and utter recreation of the previous moment. It's totally new in all of its elements. It's just that it decided to be once again very, very similar to the last moment, but it's not actually beholden to it at all. And that moment of where that freshness of that life is in every single moment new, that is Pesach. So that I don't have to, whatever happened in the past and whatever's going to happen, this moment is absolutely and utterly fresh. And I see this moment as totally new without any sort of old accumulated ideas on me. I'm just seeing it afresh. That's like the Pesach moment that exists in every single moment. That's like Pesach anytime. Part of the Jewish tradition is that by going through this natural cycle, going through the seasons and knowing what Pesach is the ability to bring Pesach into every moment, right? So it's not just during Pesach, but by celebrating Pesach and living a day where I was open to this freedom, then at any day when I need Pesach, I have that. When I need to be fresh and young and see things totally anew without any previous conception or assumption, I can bring that energy back as I did it. Just like I celebrate Shabbat, so that at any moment I could have Shabbat, I could bring myself to that space. Just like I celebrate Shavuot, which is the giving of the Torah, so that at any moment I could get guidance and definition for what I need, what needs to happen at this moment. Just like I celebrate Sukkot, which is the unity and the embrace of the rainy season and the dark cycle, so that at any moment when I can see collapse, I can say, "Oh, we're getting back together. Oh, it's so good to see everyone. It's not so scary." So the Pesach moment of that everything is always totally anew, and I can look at everything in an absolutely fresh way, and I don't have to be beholden to anything aside from what is. I do have to be beholden to what is, right? I can't go and make up a story about what actually is. I'm trying to, but what is? What is the flat? With all the, take all the puff out. What is actually going on? And I'm embracing that. That Pesach moment has to do with like when the meal itself is, I hope I don't get kicked off. Am I still here? Okay, I just got a sign that says you've been signed out. I guess that, anyways, the meal of Pesach is the simplest meal. And part of the fear or anxiety that comes from embracing the simplest things in life is that it doesn't have all of what it could be. But what happens is after you celebrate Pesach for a number of years, eating it's just flour and water with no addition to it at all. It's cooked immediately, so it has no other style to it at all. It's just boom. It's called poor man's bread or traveling bread. It's just exactly what it is. It has nothing else. It's simple herbs and the most simple meal possible. And then, upon reflection over many years, you say, wow, I've eaten so many different fancy meals, but the simplest meal is the one that I remember and the one that brought me the greatest joy of all. It's greater than any of the meals that I had. That's the meal. Like if there's one meal that is like that. And so it's all of the excess and all of the puffing up, which was always to be like, oh, so that things will be better. It was never, ever better than what it actually was, right? So the simplest meal is related to what actually is. And no matter what inflation I have, where I tell the story in a more inflated way, it never was as great as the actual of the reality of what things are. And you get an embodied feeling of that, which is that the most simplest meal, just of of the faces around me, eating the most simplest food, is actually the greatest dining experience. When that hits, and it's actually true, and you don't have not somebody telling you it, but you experience it, you're like, it is the greatest dining experience, then that cleans out any of the need of, well, what else do I need to have in this life aside from the very simplest things? I don't need and therefore I'm not a slave, because I'm not enslaved to any of those moments, aside from the fact that I need to be able to tell my own story, right? So I don't need anything fancy, but I need to be able to not have my story dictated by other people, because even if and that's what happens at the Seder. So we go and we retell the story, and the focus of the story is that we're very small. This is supposed to go for like an hour and a half, but whatever. I might truncate it. What is the story that we're telling? The story is a story where we're very, very small and everything is very, very big, right? It's not that we defeated the Egyptians, right? Because it could be a story. So one of the interesting things about the Egyptians is we have so much from them, and they have so many stories as well. And when you do a reading of any of their stories are so full of themselves, it's actually unbelievable. So you read these stories of like, I am the great Paro, and I did this, I defeated this guy in that place, and I defeated that guy in that place, and I and my great armies rose up. There are actually like almost no defeats in any of the retelling of their stories, and there's no humiliating moment. It's just like one gigantic, tremendous, great story about how amazing Egypt is. The story we could say is we defeated Egypt, but actually we didn't do anything. We just walked out. That's it. It was something without agency. So there's a difference between when we say that what is it? I don't know what the word is. What is the word that people use? It's a self-determination, right? We need self-determination, that we could determine the way our lives will go. This is not self-determination. It's telling my own story. Like, I can't determine the way life goes. That's not, oh, here's the dog that was snoring just came over and said hello. So I can't choose. I'm not in control of the way life plays out. And that is actually, I have some choices, but the way life plays out is not, self-determination is not what's on the table, but self-definition is, right? So you don't get to say where you were born, and you don't get to say, well, for most of us, you don't get to define the day you die, and you don't get to, you don't, there's so much that you can't determine yourself. Yeah, it's Bina. There's so much that you don't get to determine yourself, but you can define it, right? And that is actually the story of the Torah. It's this massive storytelling project of redefining and retelling our story over and over and over again, generation after generation, of not being captured and defined by it, but being able to retell it. And that happens in this exact moment in Pesach, where it's like the spring and the newborn lambs. There's actually the bracha for, meaning the blessing on new buds, you say this year. So for this moon is the only time that you can say the blessing on the new buds of the tree. And it's like the ripening of the grain, to be able to constantly tell your story, and let the story go, and retell your story, and let the story go, and retell your story, and let the story go. And so I'll give each one of us a blessing that at this exact, and Tali says feminine energy. And I'll stop the blessing just for that. So each person, this is not talking about what body somebody has, but with the body that we're walking around in. Everyone contains both of these energies. And Pesach is the very first month where it's the masculine energy emerging from the feminine energy. So it's the moment where the masculine energy is at its smallest, weakest, humblest moment. So it's like the pushing forward, right? Is the baby is the one that's coming out, and the mass is the mother. The large one is the mother. So it's like the feminine energy is in its fullness, which is the month of Adar, but the masculine energy is now in its tiniest state. It just emerged. And it's in its humblest. This month of Pesach is the month of Judah. And the month of Judah is that masculine energy that is like a kid, right? It's like a little boy. So it's just running around and having fun, right? Where the masculine ego, which everyone has, the masculine ego is at the top of that mountain, right? So that symbol should be obvious, right? So it's the sort of the hard mountain going up. That's the top of that would be Shavuot, where that's the most definition, and it's splitting, and it's cutting things, and it's the line energy. But this is this is almost all feminine energy, with just a little baby that's just being born. So it's like a little boy, like a little boy running around and skipping around. And that actually has to do with Judah. So this month is actually related to Judah, because where the tribes sit in the Mishkan, Judah sits in this month, and the wisdom of Judah is the wisdom of that type of wisdom, which is that you're not always sure why the little boy is acting the way he is. You're not really sure why the little kid, and this is both a boy and a girl, you're not really sure why they're doing what they're doing. And so if you try to impose on it, you don't get the deep wisdom that's beyond a rational mind. So like, why in the world are they acting like this, right? So if you say, why would they be doing this? It makes no sense. So if you shut them down at that point, then you don't get to see the wisdom that was in that crazy thing that they were doing. But if you trust it, you can watch it emerge, right? And then you'll see this like deep, deep wisdom that is sort of had a good intention to begin with, right? So like, like I was just searching for chametz just a little while ago, and the tradition is to take, and so we're removing the crumbs of the previous year. So I put 10 pieces of chametz around the house, and then you go with a feather on a wooden spoon and a candle, and you search the entire house for chametz, and then you find these 10 pieces, right? So I put 2 pieces in each room, and then that equaled 10, and we're ever since. So what did my little boys do? They decided to get their own little pieces, and then I hid the 10 around the house. So we went and we found 2, and we covered them with tinfoil. They did the exact same thing, but they inserted new ones into the thing. So we're only supposed to be finding 10, but then we ended up with 13 because they stuck new ones there. And then they kept taking them out of the bag. So once we find them, you put them into a bag. You take them out of the bag and then re-putting them around in different places to make it even harder, right? So as an old person with a lot of chametz, accumulated cultural stress and ego, I was like, you know, look, come on, there was an internal reaction, was like, can we not do this? This is not it then, but instead I just embraced it. And I'd be like, okay, I know what they're doing. I see what they're doing. They're taking out a bag and they're sticking them in, and they're surprised because they know that I know where I hid it, right? And then they went and hid it somewhere else, right? So if I shut that down, right, like why in the world they're doing? They're ruining everything. They're messing up. Da, 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 da. But if you watch it, it'd be like, oh, right. So now it just went from sort of like a very structured um, sort of ritual to now it actually is a search, because who knows where those things that they put them. And actually they could have endangered the whole thing, and now there's going to be a piece of chametz there on Pesach that we didn't find. So then it heightened it, and they were like, is this, and then I had to like, did you make another one and hide it somewhere else? Because now we can't have that lost. Did we get every single one of the pieces? And all of a sudden it turned it into the actual thing. So it's like it's like the, who knows why they're doing it, but it actually in it contains the deepest wisdom. And that's like those things of that are inside of yourself, which is like the parts of you that you define as skipping, that you define as limping initially. But if you're able to look at them in their essence and not take the story on them, and then let them grow up and see what that part of you that that you were trying to crush, you can then see the deeper wisdom of what that is. Like, these are all those things that I was trying to work on. Maybe this is the thing that I was supposed to be doing. So I give us all a bracha that we should be able to see deep within ourselves, and give us the strength to be able to let go of the stories that were put on us, the old stories that we told about ourselves, even yesterday, but especially lifelong stories, and to be able to see ourselves as good, and to allow just that moment of, let me see what this is, and let me see what comes out of it, without even needing to tell a story. Just let me see what this is, and let it emerge without chametzing it up. And I hope that with those stages of Hachna, Havdalah, and Hamtaka, we will be able to see that even the most painful and darkest moments, we will be able to retroactively redeem them and see the good in them, because I think it's the only way to live. So I give everyone a bracha that we should be able to do that.